So one of the questions I get very often in, for example, our Discord server is, Marnix, sure, you're making your games right now and cool enough, but is this actually what you want to do? Is this your magnum opus game? Is this the game that you truly live and die by, or is this just a game you're making to make money? And I'm gonna be honest, the answer is generally, it's a game that I think it's gonna sell. I do enjoy it as well, but it's not like the game that I would make if I had infinite time, infinite money and whatever. So I figured in this video, it's kind of inspired by Funky, I think it is, where he's like, these are some of the games I would make if I have time and skill. I'm going to be talking about 5 games that I have like written down game design ideas for, that we've actually tried to make, for example, and just ended up canceling it, talking about why I think they were good, and also talking a bit more about, okay, actually no, I'm not going to be making this because there are some giant flaws with it, like we don't have the team skills for it and things like that. Also, why am I making this video even? Because I made a video about it before. Ideas are worthless, it's all in the execution. So I can tell you everything you want about the game ideas I have, but I'm still pretty certain that at the end of the day, your game and my game, if we both made from the same idea I'm talking about here, would be different. And also, like I said, these are games that are very low likelihood that I will ever be making. So if you hear some cool mechanics, don't worry about it. Take those, put them in your own game, and let me know once you're done. I'm interested to see how you implement them. And let's just begin with it. So the first game that I would make, and this was kind of one that I wanted to suggest instead of Guild Architect, is Skogvoll, is how I call it. There was a translation for it, it's like Danish or Norwegian or something. I'll put it down here, what it means, but it's basically a cozy Viking city builder is the one sentence pitch of it. And it really like focused on that coziness. I didn't want to have combat, for example. You would purely look at your own little village, your Viking village, and you would see it expand. And why do I want to make this? Because I had seen the game Nova Roma. That was one that got announced like a bit before that. And I was thinking about it, like actually, I like Vikings. I've been to Denmark, been to a few of the Viking museums and things like that. I enjoy it, and I felt like there wasn't really something in that more cozy style that also had that Viking stuff. There were some like kind of okayish looking, like more high poly. I wasn't really the biggest fan of them, and they were more combat focused like city builders. So I figured that, hey, if I could make a more casual, like tiny Glade-esque, like a city builder there, I think that could be very nice. That could be something that people are interested in. Another reason why I thought it was, not the worst idea is because it has a good fit with what we are good at here at Byteman Games, which is more mechanical driven games, such as the automation game, such as Guild Architect, which is what we're working on now as well, which is more of a business simulator. I think a city builder was definitely in our capacity as well, and we could have a pretty short development cycle. I could actually scope this out at 3 to 6 months, okay, probably more like 4 to 6, where we would be using an asset for the core of the city builder thing. We would be using some assets like the Sinti asset pack for the Viking village, and then we would just put a cartoon shader on it to make it look like a bit better, have a good skybox and things like that, and then just focus on making some of the mechanics, and that's it. That's what I thought, at least. I don't know if it's like a realistic thing, but I think this is definitely one of those games that could work. Now, why did we not make it? Why did I not push for it harder? Because you may have noticed at this point, the hook is questionable. There's nothing really new we're doing, because also taking out the combat, that's not really a hook. It's actually just less of a game you have at that point. But I really wanted to keep it small in scope, and having that small scope makes it hard to find a hook, and especially after the problems we had with Songs of Everjade not really having a hook, I figured like, hey look, this needs to cook a bit more, this is not the fit right now. Also, the art style would be extremely important for a game like this, since you want to have that cozy vibe. And I could not guarantee that we had a good art style. So I figured, hey, let's just not go for it right now. I had like a little prototype. I'll see if I can get some B-roll of it, just of how I imagined it could look. Don't expect much of it though. I threw it up in like half an hour with like a simple toon shader and the Sinti Viking asset pack. But I think this could work, but it would need a lot of juice. And it's like, it's not what our studio was looking for exactly. And then the last thing is that it doesn't fully fit the team, because it's part of that cute, cozy mechanic. There's not that hard of like actual programming skills required for it. So once again, if we just put 2 programmers on it and then me, it wouldn't be the biggest success, I think. Or like, it wouldn't be the best utilization of team resources. Whereas with Guild Architect, there's a much higher focus on the mechanics, and we also have some artists now, so I think that's gonna be a better one. So how likely is it that this game is going to happen? I think it's like a 10% at most. It's something that I could probably convince the team to do if I like annoyed them a bit more about it. But I think by the time that we're there, we'll have been beaten to market by another game. Like there's a very big boom in like the cozy city builders at this point, and it's only a matter of time until someone finds out about the fact that Vikings exist and make their own version of it. That's probably gonna be better, gonna be more detailed. This was really like the scope I had here was to make a game 3 to 6 months, just so we could get some more funding for the studio as well. We didn't end up going that route, so I don't think I'll be making this anytime soon, but it could be like a cool project if I ever decide to learn programming myself. This next one is a game that I find kind of interesting because it's not a video game, but there was actually a point in my life where I wanted to make board games, and the board game I was making is Osmium. That's the name I had for it. It was a 2 to 4 person deck builder, and the whole mechanic there was basically that you had, it's a sci-fi setting, and you had these dropships. So dropships, if I'm a pretty big sci-fi nerd, it's like you have your big capital ship, and then if you want to invade a planet, you don't land in a giant ship, but you have a dropship which like flies down to the planet, and that's where the soldiers are in or whatever. And the concept would be that you would have different cards, and these cards would influence the things you have in your dropship. So your dropship would have a capacity of, let's say, 5 cards, and you could say, I want to use some of my weight allowance to missiles, I want to use some of them to have mechs instead of regular soldiers, and you would be basically configuring your dropship, and then you would fly down to a map. There would be 4 in total for the game, and you would have to get intel, you would have to fight the other people. I think there were some cool mechanics in it. I did some real world playtesting. Balancing was completely off. Like I think William or Thomas, they just cheesed everyone because they found out the great strat. And why did I even want to do this? Because 1, I like sci-fi, and 2, I think board games are a great way to learn game design. What works, what doesn't work, validate if your game is fun. And you can do it very quickly because you can just take a piece of paper and draw out something. Like we could change the rules of our game on the fly whilst I was playtesting it with the boys. Because we could just say, okay, from now on this card does something else. So it's really good in that regard. The issue is board games, they're expensive to make. You need to think about all the materials that come with it as well, which is a big downside. Like selling those things as well, you almost need some kind of publisher or you need some starting capital to get your first run of board games. That's where things like Kickstarter, hugely important for things like board games. But once again, it wasn't really the time for us to fully go into the board games because I didn't have enough experience with it. This was more of just a thing that I wanted to try out, game design. Also, marketing a board game is like a whole nother level. I, at this point, kind of know how the Steam game works, but I think selling a physical product is always going to be harder than a digital one. So making it profitable was also like even less of a thing. Now, how likely is it that I'm going to be making this board game, like picking it up later on? I think pretty much non-existent. The only thing I would do here is I would take that mechanic of that dropship, so to say, and I would put that in a different kind of game. I think that was honestly a pretty cool thing that I came up with, where you had to configure basically your ship, whether you wanted to be offensive, defensive. You could be like, hey, I want the bigger engine so I can carry more, but that meant that you needed to get more intel upgrades. I think definitely if I ever made a sci-fi game, I would see if I can push it in. Apart from that, I think board games, definitely, I will only be touching once I'm retired in like 40, 50 years from now, and I have nothing better to do with my life. And speaking of sci-fi games that I wanted to incorporate that dropship mechanic into, that brings us to our third game, which is Ashes of Lyra. This is actually a game that we tried to develop with the studio. It has a bit of a history. After Forge Industry realized, okay, we don't want to make a management or automation game. That's something we knew. And we came up with the idea of Ashes of Lyra. It was going to be a Metroidvania, top-down aspect, maybe a bit more like a Zelda-like, honestly. And you were like stranded on a planet and you had to fight some crime or whatever, or like some gangs. We applied for a grant for that game. We got denied because we didn't have the art skills, was what they told us. And that's basically where the project died. But one of the things that I was pushing for was to have that dropship mechanic of the Osmium board game in Ashes of Lyra. I think why the game would have been successful, Ashes of Lyra, is because it didn't really exist a game like that. Like not the top-down 3D aspect at least. That was something that I couldn't find any other games really that had a crazy like Metroidvania or Zelda-like approach to it. Maybe Tunic got a bit in like the same area, but Tunic is like fantasy, it's sword fighting, whereas we would be like hardcore sci-fi with guns and whatever, like laser beams. It would have been a bit different. The game that got closest to it was The Ascent, although The Ascent is more of a regular twin-stick shooter and had less of those Metroidvania aspects. So I think in that regard, it was okay. Also, I just like sci-fi. I've read so many military sci-fi books at this point, probably over 100 at this point. I have a pretty big information base at this point of possible things like upgrades or whatever. That's also why I made the Osmium game in the first place, that I thought, hey, I could add some value here. I have a good understanding of the source material, so to say. Now, why did we end up not making this? Well, first one is our funding call got denied, and we were like, okay, look, if it gets denied, probably they're onto something. Let's work on something else. So we moved on to Songs of Everjade. But some other issues that we had was story. This was going to be the first game we were making that had a story in it, because Forge Industry had zero story. Songs of Everjade also not really story. Guild Architect, not real story. This one would really force us to make a story, and honestly, we're not that good at story writing. I read a few books on it, but honestly, I would be way over my head if I actually tried to make a full game narrative. I had never written anything in my life before, so that was also something like, no. And then the third issue was, okay, it's a Metroidvania. Making a good Metroidvania, is what I've learned, is hard, because you need to plan things like your rooms. You need to do level design. Once again, never had any experience with it. The closest I got was like making custom maps in Minecraft back in like 2012. That is not really transferable knowledge at that point anymore. So we did the smart thing, I think, and just ended up canceling that project and moving on. But it was something that, hey, look, I really liked the setting at least. Now, despite that, I think the actual chance that we're going to be making this game is zero, because there were too many problems with it, because we got like a bit further in development, because we had to think out some stuff for that funding call, like our story, like our mechanics, and it didn't make sense. It was really hard to make it in a way that could make sense. We have like some diagrams of like how our level structure would be, but in the end, I just think this is not a game for our studio to make, and if I would want to make a sci-fi game, I would be making something else. But that's spoilers for one of the upcoming games I'm gonna be talking about. And then the next game that I wish I could make, if I had the skills for it, was Songs of Everjade. This is one that you've probably heard about enough at this point, but it's the game that we canceled about a month ago. The concept was, it's a Chinese mythology roguelite. So imagine something like a Hades, but set in Chinese mythology. So we would be looking at some very like authentic Chinese pieces of mythology, like the Shanghai Qing or the strange tales from a Chinese studio, and really incorporate that into our game. I think the setting is really good, but that's also the problem is this setting was our only hook. There were a lot of things wrong with this game, and you know, hindsight is 2020. Some big issues. The pixel art, pretty mediocre at best. We figured, okay, let's try pixel art instead of 3D. We learned at this point we need to go for 3D. That's the thing that our studio is best at. And also, roguelites are saturated. We were not bringing anything new to the table, which meant that if we had bad visuals and no new mechanics as well, we were dead in the water, basically. There was nothing we could do in terms of marketing the game that would make it more of a success. Also, this is where we realized, hey, actually, we're good programmers. This game does not have a good fit with our studio. Up until like Ashes of Lyra as well, we had like, oh, we can make whatever we want as long as we put our mind to it. There is definitely a focus point that your studio will have. Maybe it's programming, maybe it's art, maybe it's narrative design. There could be plenty of things. Maybe it could be like puzzle games that you're really good at. For us, it is deep, complex mechanics. That's what we learned from Forge Industry. That's what we learned with Songs of Everjade as well. Like we could get a basic game up very quickly, like 2-3 weeks, and we had a playable thing. The issue is we barely had any mechanics in our game. It was more of the combat had to feel good, and we needed to have, you know, a lot of items and the roguelite meta progression. Those were not things that we as a studio are good at. So that led to the issue that our programmers and me, we had to do things that we were not good at. We had to make game feel, which is like, we're not great at. Like that's the big problem. The combat feels too floaty or too weighty. We never managed to find a good point where our game felt nice to play, which is also why eventually we ended up canceling it. So the chances of us picking up Songs of Everjade again in the state that we left it is 0% at this point. I know some of you guys asked like, hey, can you open source it? It's a great idea. However, the issue is that we're using paid assets, which we cannot like simply just extract because things like top-down engine are in there. We can't share the code for that basically unless we're gonna get sued. We turned some of the things we learned, like the code we wrote for it and some of the assets we got commissioned that didn't look like ass, turned that into standalone assets as well, that we are like currently in the process of making a video of how does it work to make assets, but it's coming out in only like 1 to 2 months, but stay tuned for that. What I would maybe give like a 5% chance that we'll do at some point is revisit the setting, but change the game. I think what I would do instead then is make it a mix of a roguelite and a city builder, where right now you did runs where you infiltrated other sects, but there was no real reason. Why were you doing it? I don't know. there was no real cause for you to do it. I think we would definitely have to focus more on, okay, you go and invade other sects, you get materials, you get followers and whatever, so you can expand your own sect, like kind of Cult of the Lamb vibes maybe. But I think I would definitely do that. More of that mechanical focus as well, like the buildings you would then place because of the items you get from the runs would give you bonus boosts, which is part of the meta progression as well, and I think would fit better with our studios like skills. But at that point, first of all, recently, like the past half year honestly, so many Asian or like Chinese mythology inspired games or like Three Kingdom era Chinese games have come out that it's going to become a lot harder to market them because it's going to look more similar. Also, I would have to switch to 3D. We're not doing pixel art anymore. So at that point, is it a new game? Kinda, I think. So I don't think we'll be doing Songs of Everjade anytime soon. Also, the name just has like a bad taste in our mouth because, well, it is a game that failed in the end, so probably would like rebrand it and everything as well. And then this last game, this is what I would call my magnum opus. It's nothing really too complex, but the game that I want to make here is Blue Shift. And I'm just going to read my short pitch because this is a game that I've thought out quite a bit already. I've just never started making it. Is that Blue Shift is a narrative slash atmospheric slash walking sim slash puzzle game. You're an astronaut, or like this is in sci-fi setting once again, but it's not like the Star Wars level sci-fi, where you come back to Earth after a failure of your hibernation in like your spaceship, and you'll come to an Earth that is completely different. When you left, it was like very much a futuristic, in our opinion, like space sports everywhere, and we had colonized multiple planets and whatever. And then you return hundreds of years later to a post-apocalyptic world. So if you don't know what post-apocalyptic means, it's like, okay, the world has ended, but like the zombies are gone or whatever, and humanity is like starting from zero again. So you have like these massive remnants of the cities completely overgrown, but everyone who's living there is like a very simple life. Maybe they have some solar panels at most that they can like scavenge from the previous human society, but it's very much still a nomadic or a farmer world basically. And you get into this world with your spaceship, and of course for you it's a big shock, but also for all the people on Earth, because they've never seen someone like you. And the whole point would be that, okay, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure, very narrative based once again. Like I told you, I don't know how narratives work, which is why this explanation probably sucks as well. But you have to find out what has happened, and you also, the more important thing is you need to reintegrate into your new life. And there's like simple puzzles like, oh, you need to fix some wiring because you have knowledge, and like your ship has like a fabricator or whatever that can help the local society. You can find out like what happened since you were gone, what happened to everybody you knew, and then move on, find out what am I going to do with my life from here on out. It's very inspired by some slice of life sci-fi books that I read, such as for example the books by Becky Chambers, To Be Taught If Fortunate, or the Monk and Robot duology. Those are really the vibe I want to capture. It's like not much happens. It's almost a walking sim. And I think this is a game that would not sell. It would also have more of an anime, like very vibrant and luscious green and solar punk kind of vibe. But once again, I'm not an artist. Why do I want to make this game? Well, first of all, I like sci-fi. You've heard this point multiple times already. Second of all, I want to learn narrative design at some point in my life. And if I would learn it, this would be the game that I would work towards. And then the last thing is, I think this is a pretty unique story when it comes to games. Now, watch me say this and you guys leave like 50 comments of like, oh, it's exactly like this game or this game. But I think definitely the story is something that, especially like you have those Becky Chamber books, I could tell like a whole new perspective of that story in more of a games-based medium. It's something that sounds interesting to me. So why am I not making this? Well, the first issue is I have zero narrative experience. At this point, I should just make a short story or like a novella or something of the idea I have of the game if I just want to learn like story writing before I actually try to take that and then add on top making a game with story. I think that's just asking for a world of pain. It's also gonna be hard to market. Walking sims, they're not really easy to market. There's no flashy gameplay. You can't really make a good trailer for it. So once again, this game would not be making me any money, and I currently do not have the amount of disposable income to try and make games like this. And then the last thing is the art style. Once again, we're no true artists. We would need some pretty good like core models for example, those solar punk cities, for the completely overgrown world. That's not easy to get. I have learned at this point I'm not the best 3D modeler, so either I would need to spend a lot of time learning 3D modeling myself, or I would need to have the budget to get a 3D artist. Also things like the actual visual style. I wanted to go for more of an anime, solarpunk, vibrant vibe. I have no experience with that yet. With Guild Architect, we're kind of trying to go for that anime style, but still, we're nowhere close to having a final version of that or something that I feel like, hey, this would fit the game that I'm making. So how likely is it that I will be making this game? I think this is like the most likely, like 15-20%. I'll probably make this at some point, but it's probably going to be taking years before I go and actually commit to this. I'll be making a like visual novel version maybe of the game first, is something I thought about. Could be an interesting video as well, like trying to make a game in Ren'Py in like 7 days and then use this as a story. But then still you have the issue of I need all the 2D art, I need all the panels basically, I need the characters, and it's a lot of work and I don't have that much time. I need to focus on YouTube, I need to focus on Guild Architect, so it's not happening anytime soon, unfortunately. But this is going to be the game that I would personally, not as a studio, but me personally would really like to see. Anyways, these are some of the games that I wish I could make. It's a bit of a different video, but I figured, hey, let's try and branch out a little bit. Let me know which of these games, like if I talk about the hooks and things like that a bit more, what sounds the most interesting to you? Or what is a game that you are like, I would really want to make this, but once again, you don't have the art skills, you don't have the code skills or whatever. So you probably won't be able to make it. I'm really interested, what are like your pipe dreams? Don't worry, I won't steal them. Remember, your awesome game ideas are worthless because it's all in the execution. Apart from that, if you're new here, we're a game development studio. We document the progress of making your own studio, making your own games, the financial aspect as well. Sometimes we do more like random stuff like this, or we make a tier list. Anything goes basically. We upload 2 times a week, so if that's something you're interested in, be sure to head down below and subscribe, because that way you'll be notified the moment that we upload these videos, and I think you're going to get a lot of value from them. Apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!